All right. Hello and welcome to another Expert Insight interview. My name is John Golden from SalesPOP, online sales magazine, and Pipeliner CRM, joining you from a sunny, actually heatwave San Diego today. And I'm delighted to be joined from across the other side of the country by Richard Broo, who is in lovely Raleigh, North Carolina. How you doing, Richard?
How you doing, John? Happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And Richard's a project management turnaround specialist and founder of True North PMP Consulting, more than 4 decades experience across Fortune 500 companies, mid-market and private equity-backed organizations. And Richard, you're the person who expert leaders call when projects are bleeding budget, sliding timelines, suffering scope creep. We've all been there, or losing leadership alignment. And you specialize in rescuing initiatives that are quietly failing long before anybody at the top notices. So, one of the things, Richard, is, I mean, obviously you've been around projects for a long time. It seems, is it correct that projects don't tend to like explode or implode like dramatically? It tends to be this kind of drift. So what's the invisible erosion that happens when everybody's sitting around thinking, well, the project's going great?
Yeah. Well, projects don't fail usually due to one
Mhm.
issue or scenario. There's an intersection between the project planning, the project execution, and the people and the
Mhm.
discipline within that execution. That's where we start to see the failures come to fruition. And unfortunately, they hit that point, but we don't have to hit that point all the time if we just have our radar up on really what's going on up front. So when I walk into a situation, those are the three things. Look at, how do you plan it? How are how's it being run right now? Why do you think it's off the rails? And finally, I look at the people planning and the discipline factor. That's where you're going to find your failures.
Mhm. And then, I mean, and it is typical too, like they maybe have done all the prep work, maybe they have a 50-page project plan or whatever, and everything seems fine. But then you get scope creep, right? and
Right.
and people don't notice, the people don't really notice the cumulative effect of scope creep, do they? Because they just think, oh, we'll just add this bit or just add something, or we never thought about that, let's just add that piece on. And before you know it, you have massive scope creep before anybody has really noticed how much it's gone beyond the original.
That's correct. And a project should start with a project scope statement. What is in scope and what is out of scope. And that's what should be reviewed at every
Mm.
meeting that you have on that project and with the client to make sure everybody's calibrated on that. What I have seen happen is you and I might be working on a project to say make a computer mouse, and we're told it has to have a right and a left click and a wheel in the middle, and it has to be gray and black and have tactile feel. Well, you and I are there developing this thing, and you say, "Hey, Rich, we could put a little light on this thing if you hit that thing twice, so like when
Mhm.
it's in a dark room, it's easier to use it." And I go, "Yeah, that's a great idea. I think the customer will like that." Well, did the customer ask for that? No, but
Mhm.
we went off and did that anyway. And then when we go to see the customer, he goes, I didn't ask for that. I mean, it's nice to have, but that's not what I need. That's the first breakdown that I see in scope creep. The other thing I see is when customers or companies start to plan scope, they don't take the time to go after not just the scope and what's in and out of scope, but what are the assumptions and constraints about why you're telling me, Mr. Customer, why you want
Mm.
to have this in your project scope. Okay. What are the risks that if we come off scope that could happen? Those things really, they're discussed, but they're not
Mhm.
discussed to the level they should be discussed.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I would agree with that. I recall this so many times from customer projects in the past. Is, yeah, you go and you talk to the customer, and they give you a download of all the things that they want in this, and and then you have to kind of go through with them and figure, just like you said, and figure out what are the actual critical things you need, what are the things that make a difference, and what is the stuff that's either nice to have or you're just throwing in because you think it should be in there. And I think those, and you're right, and I don't think sometimes people are very good at having those kind of conversations about, because you mentioned In scope, yeah, that's easy, but out of scope, that's often ignored.
Correct. And also, the other thing that I coach my clients on is you started out with the scope of work. That must be reviewed throughout the whole project life cycle, right? Now you have agile project management, which is you iterate yourself to what the customer wants. That's great. When you're not doing agile, but doing waterfall, which is very, sequential, you still need to do that. Because as you're going through the project and you discover things, you need to bring that to the customer. Is this still in scope? You want these features. These are your low-hanging fruit. These are your high-hanging fruit. But unfortunately, this piece of high-hanging fruit's really not attainable in this iteration or at this point. You still want to pursue that because that's going to have an impact now to come back to look at scope, schedule, and budget.
Yeah, I worked with.
Can't do that.
Yeah.
Well,
no, they don't. I worked with somebody once many moons ago, but he was great at this because the customer would just give it the download and he'd go, okay, here's phase one. Phase one would have all the critical things and they'd agree these are critical. Then he'd say phase two, these are the next level, and phase three never ever got to phase three.
Yep.
Because phase three contained all the things that they didn't really need. And then when they got into it, they realized they didn't need them.
Right. And I've had customers, but we would like to put in this extra feature, they're not adding it.
Yeah.
One of the things that I learned in project management with General Electric Plastics when I was there is give the customer what they want. And as you're developing that and you figured out other features that would enhance what they originally want, bring it up at project closure at the end and say, we've gotten you this far, but look at what we discovered along the way that could enhance this. And that was one of the things that kept General Electric Plastics ahead of the competition, which is by the time you figured out what our product was, we already had a second generation ready to go. Right. So our competitors were playing catch up to us the whole way.
No, absolutely. And one of the other things you call invisible assassins, and I love this one, is assumptions, right? Because I think that is the thing that undermines so many different things, because we all fall into that trap of making assumptions, especially if we've been around for a while and doing things, and we've a lot of experience. Sometimes we overrate our experience and we make some assumptions. So talk to me a little bit about how assumptions can really undermine a project.
Well, every project has an assumption behind it. And hopefully a project begins with a business case. Hopefully, although I've seen a lot that haven't.
Right.
But within that business case, and when you're talking about what's in scope and out of scope, the next thing you have to boil down to is, what are your assumptions, Mr. or Mrs. Client, about why you want these things? What benefits will they provide you? What's the value for you here? Because it's one thing to say, I want this feature, but if you and I are developing that, we need to know why. What's the value? Because we're creating the value, not the feature. We're creating the value. The feature is just a manifestation of the value.
Yeah.
So if you don't, in my opinion, if you don't have that conversation, please help me understand the assumptions that you are making about why you want it this particular way. Because if I understand your assumptions, now I have some breathing room that I can work with on what you want to make sure those assumptions are 1, verifiable, 2, measurable, and 3, realistic. Right? And then there's the other part of that is, what's the constraints? What can't happen and why? So you and I have probably been there, but to say, well, I want to have these, but I only have a budget of X amount of dollars. So there's my constraint. You want all these things for this price. Now I got to go back and verify, is that capable? And then I got to make sure it is capable. And then, make sure that you and I have now this firm understanding, not just scope, but what are the assumptions and constraints around that? And then the third thing that I think people need to do a better job of is the risks. Projects get undertaken, and yes, project managers look at risk, some better than others. Yes, engineering leadership takes a look at risk, some better than others. But there's the risk, okay? It's a risk. It may or may not happen. But If it happens now, it's a real issue. It's in your living room and you got to go deal with it.
Absolutely.
So when I coach on risk, it's okay, what's the risk? What will trigger that risk? Because you want to be looking at the trigger so it doesn't get pulled. And if it does get pulled, then now you have a response and an ownership for that response. Who's going to own that? Who's going to monitor and control that? And who's going to be responsible for making sure that risk has been eliminated or mitigated? And that all bundles into all the upfront work you have to do if you want to be successful in delivering product on budget, on time, with what the client really wants.
Yeah. And you mentioned something there that I think is really, really important, is that, when the customer says they want this, then you go back and you figure it out, and then you have to ask them why. What is the value of this, right? And as you said, you're creating value. There's as much value in you challenging that to say, what is it that the customer may go, you're right, there isn't actually much value to that. Maybe I don't need that part. That is creating as much value for the customer as it would be for you to deliver a feature often.
No, I agree. And I think when you get to that point with the client and you put it all down on a piece of paper, one of the best practices that I learned at General Electric and that I use, we're going to sign that document. You and I, if you're my client, we're going to sign it to make sure that we are now calibrated mentally and physically on a piece of paper. And we're going to use that calibration throughout the project lifecycle to make sure we both stay focused on what we agreed to do.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing is, other thing that undermines projects is weak ownership, right? Or lack of defined ownership, or maybe you have an overall owner, but do you know what I love, Richard? Do you love those ones when you have tasks or parts of a project and you go, well, who owns that? And you go, well, it's kind of John and it's kind of Richard. So we'll put them both there, right?
Yeah. It's tough to have two masters to a task.
Exactly. So talk to me about how much weak ownership can undermine projects.
It's critical. I came from Fortune 500, and there was always a project sponsor, and that project sponsor would be connected directly to the project manager and the project team, and they would be there to take care of the things the team couldn't. So we pushed all decisions and all actions to the lowest level at General Electric, so the project team had some anonymity to do what they need to do. But things that were outside of our wheelhouse, we would elevate to that project sponsor, who would then make a decision. So if there was a situation where we were developing a product and one of our competitors jumped the shark a little bit quicker than we did, and so we had to go escalate that up to say, do you still want to continue down this path, or now are we going to, refit everything and jump their shark? Right. But we had someone can do that. Now in smaller and medium-sized companies, it could be the CEO, the COO, president. But if there's not direct connection between the leadership and the team as the project goes, the team's going to get the attitude real quick as well. They're not interested. They're not even showing any interest. They're not asking. We ask them to come to meetings. They don't show, or they say, well, send me an email and I'll answer it. It's very easily to discourage the project team from thinking that there's a connection. Yeah. So if you or I as leaders disconnect, they'll figure that out real quick. And yes, there'll be efforts to get you to back in, but if you're not willing to engage throughout that life cycle, that project is basically doomed to fail. And 19% of all projects fail. And that's one of the major reasons why.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, because people take their cues from the leadership, and if you come today and say, I'm the project sponsor and this is really important, and then you're completely detached from it afterwards, or you barely check in, you're late, the people working on the project are getting that message that, this project isn't that important.
Right. You have to have, the team needs someone that can represent them or sponsor them to that upper echelon of the company, and to help make the decisions the team is not empowered to make. And, and I've seen a lot of projects where it's gun ho, let's get going on it. And then next thing it's like, well, I can't find Donna. I need her, and she's on the road and she's not responding. And So what happens is now your team goes into a vacuum if it's a real critical decision. Now you're blowing money and you're blowing time. And that's one of the things that you said leaders get word too late. That's part of getting word too late. Donna, I have been trying like hell to get hold of you. This is a major decision outside of our wheelhouse. And 2 weeks later, you're coming back and giving me a decision.
And think, I mean, as you know, I'm just saying for the audience, think about the cost of that, right? Maybe that 2-week delay or a week delay in getting an answer. Think of the hidden cost in that.
Right. The hidden costs are, one, you're paying people to do a job, and now you're paying them and they're in a vacuum. They cannot proceed. So that, to me, is wasted wage.
Absolutely.
2, if you're dealing with outside vendors that are critical to the project and you can't get a decision from the echelon that may decide that, now you're dealing with vendor schedules, which may negatively impact the overall schedule because you can get the answer right away or quickly. And now that resource you need is now delayed another 2 to 3 weeks. And then the other thing that I find is it's the emotional part of it.
Yep.
It's, I am waiting for you to help me get over a hump that I am not authorized to take over. The longer you make me wait, emotionally, I get drained and the project team loses some enthusiasm. If they begin to say, I've got skin in this game. Where's your skin? And I'm not going to let my skin be burned any more than it has to be if you don't want to help me out here.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me, when you're brought into an organization where there's a project is going off the rails or there's problems, like what's the first thing you do?
Okay. First thing I do is a triage. I want to see the original project baselines for scope, schedule, and budget. Then I want to get a snapshot of the current status as it relates to scope, schedule, and budget. And I'm going to be looking for where all the variances are. Okay, so we're off on schedule, we're over budget. As far as scope goes, it looks like they're going somewhere they shouldn't go on scope. So I do a triage. That takes maybe a day or two to figure out what's going on. Then the next thing I do is I like to bring together the project team. And I like to go from triage to let's brainstorm some root causes of why you're in this particular situation. Just no judgment, just get it on the table because you're the people closest to the issue. What is it? All right, so they're going to give me what they feel the root causes are. And I'm going to compare that against part of what other than triage from the leadership, which is, well, what do you think? Because sometimes what the leadership thinks is not what the actual boots on the ground are doing or thinking.
Yeah, absolutely.
Then I take them into what's called root cause corrective action. We're going to narrow down all those potential root causes, and we're going to narrow it down to 2 or 3 that really are the main culprits that'll free up that bottleneck. Okay, what are the logical root cause corrective actions that we can take to kill these bottlenecks quickly? And then how do we do it? Who on the team will do it? How will we monitor and control it? And who's going to be responsible ultimately to say it's been closed? So then we implement those root cause corrective actions. We go into daily monitoring, controlling of what those actions are doing or not doing. And we're looking for any secondary risks or issues that might come up because we decided to take this action. But if we're doing the right things and monitoring and controlling and making adjustments if possible, we can close that issue within a 60-day period maximum. But that's my approach when I get called in to do help on bringing something back on the rails.
And how, like you mentioned earlier, I mean, how typical is it for like there to be a misperception, shall we say, between what the or misalignment in perception between what the leadership think and what the project team thinks is going on? I figured that's probably fairly typical.
It is typical. It's one of those silent killers that when you find out that, well, the team sees the problems or the issue from this perspective, And this is what they've done to try to resolve it, with or without input from leadership. A lot of times it's without input from leadership because they're boots on the ground trying to advance the whole thing forward.
Mm-hmm.
Management, what I find is management, while they may have an idea, depending on how close they are to the team and the situation, a lot of it will be genericized. Well, we think it's the engineering team and they're not executing this part of the project. Well, what makes you say that? Because I don't see the results coming from that part of the project. Okay, so I go through the five whys, which is one of the techniques used for uncovering root cause of issues. I do the same thing with the team. And if I see a disconnect, I will come back to the manager and say, this is what you thought the issue was.
Mm-hmm.
But this is what's really going on down where the issue is occurring. And this is what needs to be done to bring everybody back in sync to move forward. And in sync can mean many things. You're going to de-scope to survive. You're going to redo your scope, schedule, and budget. And I've been in extreme cases where it's off the rails so far that it got killed. It's like, we're too far off the rails. We don't have enough money to recover this. Mm-hmm. But you got to be looking for the differences, because there will always be some difference between what the leader thinks, and there's nothing bad about that. That's what they think.
Yep.
But what's going on the ground at that level, that's what's most important.
Yeah. And it can be tough. I've always found it can be tough when people are working so hard in a project and they're pouring everything into it, and then there's issues, and maybe you have to come and say, we're going to have to de-scope, or we're going to have to change direction, or maybe, as you said, and maybe the company says, we're going to have to kill this project. That's psychologically, that can be very, very difficult for the people working on the project. I mean, I've always said to people, don't get married to your projects, because I always said that to people who work for me. I said, because there is a very good chance that one day I'll come to you and say, stop what you're doing. We need to do this, because things have changed in circumstances, and you're going to have to be okay with that, even though that's a tough thing to do.
It is. And if you go way up into the front of a project, what I don't see a lot going on in small to medium-sized companies, the financial due diligence. So you come to me with a project, and I have a company, and I've got 5 or 6 projects that are on my plate from different clients. Well, do I understand the return on investment for each project, the internal rate of return, the net present value? Okay, because I can't handle 5 projects. So I've got to pick what I want to take. But it's the same thing inside the company. If you and I are co-CEOs of a company, we want to improve operations down on the floor, we think this would be a good project to do that. Well, there's finances connected with that. We should clearly understand of what we want to do, what the financial benefits and implications are. A lot of small to medium-sized companies don't do that. I get called on taking a lot of projects, and they say, well, I've got like 15 projects on my plate, and I don't know what to do in total. I said, well, now it's the tail wagging the dog versus the dog wagging the tail.
Absolutely. And I agree with you. I think oftentimes is that whole cost thing, because there's the obvious costs, and then there's all those hidden costs. It's like when I borrow somebody. Can I borrow somebody for your team just for half a day? Come on over here. I need them to do something. That's a cost. And I probably never calculate that into the project cost, because I'm just borrowing somebody for a day. Or maybe you could do this for me, and maybe do the, and I think sometimes companies are really bad at costing things properly and really attributing the real expense.
I would agree with that. I don't think it's that difficult. I think it's a discipline. And I think in any project that one wants to undertake, that discipline should be done, because ultimately the leadership wants to know, am I going to be successful and profitable with this and gain all the benefits that I want and our client wants? All right. You can't make a holistic decision without knowing those numbers. I just don't know how a company can make a decision without knowing those numbers.
Absolutely, because ultimately, I mean, one day somebody, because everyone reports to somebody, whether it's a board of directors, whether it's investors or whatever, somebody's going to ask you one day, you spent a lot of money on this project. What was the return?
Exactly. Exactly. And that's something, that's part of what I call discipline with when I talked about that intersection, that's all part of when you hit that intersection, that's the aha moment. Well, what's this really costing us? What now compared to what we think the benefits we're going to get? Well, that should have been done up front. Shouldn't be
Yeah.
done when you hit that aha moment.
Absolutely. And you should know if you're hitting over, if you're going cost overruns as well, because that's another thing that can, especially early in the project or whatever, people can lack a little bit of discipline.
Yes, one of the things I learned early on, working for GE, and plastics was started or ran by Mr. Welch for a long time.
Mhm.
He had a saying: the day makes the week makes the month makes the quarter.
Yeah.
And every review we went to, there was a financial segment to it where we talk about scope, we talk about where the project stands right now. You hit a report out on your budget, your resources, your issues, your needs. I mean, it was very structured. Now, I'm not saying every company has
Sure.
to do that, but they have to have some protocol by which to incorporate those things in order to have a really realistic view of where they stand with their projects. So,
Mhm.
that's
Absolutely.
something small to medium-sized companies, they don't have that cadence or that discipline every time.
And the worst part of that is they're the ones who can ill afford the expense overruns.
Exactly.
Not that big companies can, but you know what I mean. They're a little bit easier to maybe to mitigate against than they are at small and medium companies. They can be catastrophic. I have my favorite. My favorite Jack Welch is, and I've used this throughout my career, is face reality as it is, not as it was or how you would like it to be.
Exactly. Exactly. And there's a lot of people, there's divergence opinion on that man, but I can tell you, I stood in front of him for 17 years of my career there, and he was fair, he was honest, he was direct,
Hmm.
and he ran a tight ship.
Yeah.
And not everybody's going to be a General Electric, but there are things you can learn from companies like that to take the smaller to medium-sized companies to help them become more operationally efficient, to reduce costs, cycle time to revenue, risk, and waste. And that's ultimately the pains that people experience in project management. And that's ultimately the type of pain that what I do for a living to try to eliminate.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Richard, thank you so much for this. So many great insights. All of Richard's information will be below this video. But before we go, please remind people about what you do.
Yes, I am a project recovery specialist, and I work with small to medium-sized companies to help them bring back on the rails, if you will, projects that are over budget, behind schedule, or experience some type of project stress like project scope. And my goal for these companies is to be successful for them so that they have better operational efficiency, improve competitive differentiation, profitability, and most of all, a more sustainable project management process.
Excellent. Well, listen, thanks again, Richard. Thank you for watching and listening. See you all again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.